Okay, good morning, everyone. How are we doing? Thumbs up. Not terrible. Just tired. Okay. Uh, I'm sorry?
Less cold than usual.
Yeah, not quite as cold. The rain is good.
I have a hunch that that all the water being present makes it more difficult for the weather to cool down. It has to cool down all that water too.
Yes, exactly. The humidity at ground level captures more heat, and then also the clouds prevent radiative loss of heat headed out to space. Um, okay. So actually, something I was going to say on Thursday but forgot to say. For folks who don't remember or weren't here on the first day, I wanted to just remind you all that I'm non-binary. Right now, there's been a flurry of executive actions targeting trans folks, non-binary, and genderqueer, gender non-conforming folks. And if that is impacting your mental health, or you just want someone to talk to, you are welcome to come and talk with me. There have also been a lot of, basically ICE has stepped up a lot of enforcements. There have been both actual and rumored raids in the Central Valley, in LA, in San Francisco. This might be impacting you or your family. This is not an issue I have a personal tie to, but if that's something you want to talk about with someone, I'm also happy to listen. Just wanted to put that out there for you all. For class, here is Jag sleeping very cozily on the sofa where he doesn't normally sleep. Normally he sleeps on the back of the sofa. Thank you. Apples are right here. When I get a second, I'll put them out a little bit nicer, but if you want to come up and grab some out of the bag, that's totally fine. Okay. This Friday, so you may have picked this up. All of you have been here at least one semester, I think. The philosophy department, like most other departments, has a colloquium series or a speaker series where we bring in faculty from other universities to come and share their research with us. Philosophy is having our first event in the speaker series this Friday with Eddie M. Brown, who's a professor at San Jose State. Philosophy professor at San Jose State, but I believe is about to move to like Brown or something like that, maybe Brown or Duke, somewhere on the East Coast. He works on sort of social media ethics, and he's going to be talking, the title of his talk this Friday is Recommended Selves, Authenticity, and Algorithmic Filtering, and he's going to be talking about the way social media algorithms shape our understanding of who we are, like how your feed influences how you think of yourself and your self-identity. Seems very, very interesting. I'm looking forward to meeting him. The talk is going to be this Friday, 3:30 to 5 p.m. This building, Cobb 2, one of the smaller classrooms on the second floor that kind of face out. So if you're interested in this, please feel free to stop by and watch the talk. Now I wanted to do some follow-up on stuff from last week. First, on the quiz results, lots of people passed, lots of people didn't quite pass, few people didn't take it. All of those things are totally fine. You can view your answers and feedback now. Those have been available since I think Sunday is when I made them visible to you all. So you can look at the answers you gave. The automatic graded ones have like an automatic comment on the wrong answers. So hopefully that can clarify some of like the true false questions, for example. and the feedback that Polyphony or I gave on the other things. You can also try the quiz again now if you haven't passed it yet. So I reopened that for resubmissions right away. Somebody else actually did it a second time through and passed within about an hour of that. So you can try the quiz again right now. It'll be open through Friday evening, the same time as last week. If you already passed, that is, you got 10 out of 12 already, you're great. You don't need to do it again. I will reiterate that on Thursday with some visuals, because I know that can be a little bit confusing until you fully understand like how the course works. Among people who didn't pass, the most common issue was getting premise conclusion form right. So as a reminder, when we ask you to put an argument in premise conclusion form, we're looking for three things. We want a numbered list, not just one sentence after another. We want each claim of the argument on its own line. It can be helpful to break things up sometimes. So one issue some folks had was a sentence where like there's a conclusion and then a premise in the same sentence. Those need to be broken up, right? Because they're doing two different things in the argument. You need a numbered list, each claim on its own line, and then the conclusion at the end, the conclusion at the very bottom. Those are the three key things that we're looking for premise conclusion form. I and Polyphony don't want to answer questions about particular questions in front of the whole class, because other folks might get those questions on their next attempt. You can meet with us one-on-one if you have particular questions. Or right now, are there any general questions about the quiz? Sunya?
I can't tell if I pass or not.
Okay, I'll take a quick look.
I don't know. Time to, I think. It didn't say.
Okay, I'm not familiar with this interface, so we'd have to meet one-on-one to figure out like this way of looking at CAT courses to tell for sure. Oh, okay. I'll go over on Thursday some ways that you can check whether or not you passed the quiz. Anything else about the quiz in general for right now? Okay. So last Thursday, we talked about acceptability, thinking about who would be likely or unlikely to accept a controversial claim. We talked about support, the question of whether the premises, when we take them all together and assume temporarily that they're acceptable, if we accept them temporarily, whether the premises give evidence or reason to believe the conclusion, and then emphasizing that acceptability and support are independent aspects of an argument. We assess whether each individual premise is acceptable, whether the premises taken together provide support, and you can have arguments where all the premises are acceptable, but they don't provide support, or they provide support, but the premises aren't acceptable. Okay. Seems like there weren't questions about these things on the two-sentence papers. And on the quizzes, people generally did pretty well with the true-false questions on acceptability and support. But are there any leftover questions from last time? Okay, great. So this week, we're going to be, this week and next week, we're going to be developing another technique for representing arguments visually called making argument maps. This is a term that gets used kind of loosely in a lot of different contexts. We are going to be more precise about sort of the rules for argument maps than you might have encountered in other contexts or the way other people use the term. So just keep that in mind if this is a term that you've encountered elsewhere. Argument maps are visual representations of arguments. I don't know why my internet connection is being weird. Let's try turning off the VPN for the moment. I am on Eduroam. Am I still connected to the internet? Oh, this is going to be a complication. Okay. We will. Yeah, my Wi-Fi has died. Okay. We will do that real quick, and hopefully it will recover. Okay. So argument maps are visual representations of arguments. This means you can't just like type them out into a box on Cat Courses or Google Docs or wherever. There are two basic ways that you can create these visual representations. You can draw them out by hand, or you can use software intended to create things like diagrams, flowcharts, or mind maps. If you draw them by hand, you need to make sure that you have pens of two different colors. Something like red and blue have a nice contrast, and usually both those colors show up pretty well on the paper or whatever you're drawing on. You need to make sure your handwriting is legible because Polyphony and I need to be able to read them. And you also need to have a workflow where after you draw it by hand, if say that's on a piece of paper, you can capture an image with your camera, you can move it to your computer, and then upload it to Cat Courses when you're completing an assignment that asks you to construct an argument map. Okay? This isn't hard, but do make sure you're thinking about these things as you're figuring out what approach you want to take to create argument maps. On the other hand, you can make argument maps using software. It needs to have a few specific features in order to be able to create argument maps, especially efficiently. So first of all, it needs to be able to create shapes with text inside. It needs to be able to draw arrows between those shapes, and you need to be able to change things like the colors of the shapes and the text, the stock of the arrow between things. We're going to distinguish between solid versus dashed arrows, and then the arrow head, the standard pointy thing, versus something like an X or a bar. The reasons why we need to be able to create like two kinds of things will be important on Thursday and especially next week, because we need those to represent two different sides of a debate. In class, I will be using a tool called Miro. Come on. Oh, seriously? Okay. I need to mute all the displays. Cancel override. Okay. Okay, we are back on the recording. So this is this platform Miro that I used to create argument maps. This diagram you should recognize from the syllabus. I created in here. So we've got boxes of slightly different shapes, like rounded rectangles versus square rectangles. That's not important in terms of argument maps. We can give them different colors. We can put text inside. We can draw arrows between them. Okay, so I like to use Miro for making these in class. And it's worth noting that there's a free student plan. So if this is, I believe you can get away with the free plan for our purposes, but you may like run out of sort of space to create more argument maps over the course of the semester. And then you have to like delete old ones and stuff. You could also get this student plan, which is like free for 2 years, and you get all of the full-fledged features for those 2 years. course, there are also other software that you can use to create things like diagrams, flowcharts. You can do this in Google Slides, for example, if you really want to. So that's just where to go to make argument maps. Now to actually make some. So when we make argument maps, let's work through this example here on the right, all of these different steps. So over here we have a very simple argument. Racial segregation reduces some persons to the status of things, hence segregation is morally wrong. So we start by converting this to premise conclusion form, which is just like this. Excuse me, just like this in this case. Next, each individual claim of the argument goes in a box. So I'm going to, if I remember right, it's not too awkward to do this. So I'm going to select all the argument here in Google Slides and copy, come over here to a chunk of this Miro workspace I'm not using, and then paste. And this gives me a text box that I can work with. So I'm going to grab, I like the rounded corner rectangles, but it's not super important. I'm going to grab a shape, and I'm going to paste the text into the shape. This shape needs to be a little larger to hold everything. Zoom in a little bit. It is kind of hard to read with the default transparent background, so I will set this to white. And I'm going to make the text blue and the border blue. But at this stage, the colors aren't super important. So I have the first claim, the premise of the argument, here in the box. And then one of the nice things about Miro is that it's very easy to create an arrow. An arrow with a new box. And I can put my conclusion down here. Those are all of the steps, so I can get rid of that. Let's see. Each claim went in a box. The conclusion is down at the bottom. So like premise conclusion form, we're going to put the conclusion down at the bottom. Premises go above in blue. It can be helpful to number them or label them, but that's not strictly necessary. And the arrow shows support. And actually, for reasons, you can make the arrow blue too. So the arrow, we have three elements of this argument map. We have the premise, we have the conclusion, and then we have the arrow, which indicates that the premise supports the conclusion. If we accept that racial segregation reduces some persons to the status of things, then this is a reason to accept the conclusion that segregation is morally wrong. Now we need to export this as an image, in this case, so I can put it back on the slides. This is slightly tedious in Miro because you have to create this frame thing. And then you go here and you export it as an image. But then we can just drag and drop it into Google Slides. And, oh, yeah, okay. So that's an argument map. We started by putting the argument in premise conclusion form to identify the premises and conclusions. We put each claim in its individual box. The conclusion was down at the bottom. The premises go above. And then we use arrows to show support, that this premise gives a reason to accept this other, the conclusion. Any questions about that example? Okay. So what I would like you to do in groups is work through the same process for this other argument. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can sort of see everything as clearly as possible, and then give you control over your screens. Okay. So you should pick someone to drive. If you need a few minutes for that person to set up a Miro account, or figure out, drawing software or wherever you're going to use to create argument maps, that is totally fine. Take the time right now to get that set up. And then follow these steps to construct an argument map for this little argument over here. Any questions about what I'd like you to do? Okay. I will go ahead and turn on the music for this one. Really bad. So we'll come back together. If you're having difficulties connecting a laptop to the display, there are a few options. You can use the document camera, which seems to be very reliable in connecting, and then put like a tablet or a piece of paper underneath that and draw on that and put that up on the display. Or like table 2, use the whiteboard instead. It's maybe not as fancy. You can't put scrolls on the background of your argument map. But it is a way to get it up there where everyone can see it, and you all can talk about it and work on it together. But OK. So could I get a group to volunteer to share their argument map and just walk us through it real quick?
It's not very
Duncan.
much of a map, is it?
I'm sorry?
It's not very much of a map, is it?
Well, it's not much of an argument, but that's OK, because the points,
Hallway.
yeah.
You can get, it goes from point A to point B.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have our premise, which is many people don't realize that they drink more alcohol than is healthy for them. And this leads to our conclusion, which is that doctors ought to talk to their patients about alcohol consumption. These are 2 boxes. They're connected with a line, which is an arrow pointing at the conclusion. It is admittedly noteworthy that there's like 2 or 3 premises in here that you could argue are implied, but we weren't told to draw those, so they're not here.
Yep. Good. So this is a version here in Miro. Did anybody come up with anything very different from this? You all look good. Your table looks good. What I saw at table 9, you all looked good. Anybody have any questions? OK, cool. Let me just grab this. And whoops. Drop this into here and make it smaller. This one's a little harder to fit. OK. Good. Take control of your screens again. OK. Good. So now we have the second example of a simple argument map. One thing about this map is that it only has a single premise. The only 2 examples we've seen so far have a single premise. So here is the most important argument we will talk about in this entire semester. Premise 1, Jasper is a cat. Premise 2, cats have fuzzy tummies. Conclusion, Jasper has a fuzzy tummy. So this argument has 2 premises. If we put it in premise conclusion form, premise 1, Jasper is a cat. Premise 2, cats have fuzzy tummies. Therefore, Jasper has a fuzzy tummy. Bring this over to Miro. Copy and paste. OK. It's still one claim is one box. So each individual claim here is going to go in a box. Jasper is a cat. And cats have fuzzy tummies. So Jasper has a fuzzy tummy. OK. Each claim is in its own box. same as before. Conclusions down at the bottom, same as before. But where do I put the arrow? If I draw this arrow, what is this saying about premise 1 and premise 2? I'm going to number these so we can refer back to them easily. If I draw that arrow, what is that saying about the relationship between premise 1 and the conclusion? Devin?
Well, it's implying what premise 2 is, and that's that cats have fuzzy tummies.
I think you're in the vicinity of what I was going for. What I was going for was this arrow, the support arrow, says that the premise supports the conclusion. That's what the arrow in an argument map means, that the premise supports the conclusion. Gives us a reason to accept the conclusion. But this premise can't stand by itself. If we don't know that cats have fuzzy tummies, then the fact that Jasper is a cat doesn't tell us anything about whether he has a fuzzy tummy. We need this additional information in the second premise that cats have fuzzy tummies. Is that what you were going for, Devin? Yeah, okay. So what I need is not just the arrow to say this one premise supports the conclusion. I need to be able to say these two premises working together support the conclusion. So rather than a support arrow just from a single premise, I'm going to do this. I'm going to add another box around the two premises. I'm going to send it all the way to the back so it doesn't cover up the two premise boxes. This is called a grouping box. So I'm grouping these two premises together. I'm saying we need both of them working together to support the conclusion. So remember, acceptability is something we assess premise by premise, each premise individually. Do we all have a good reason to accept that Jasper is a cat? Yes. Assuming this is a picture of Jasper, which it is, we have good reason to accept that Jasper is a cat. Do we have good reason to accept that cats have fuzzy tummies? For the most part. You might think, oh, maybe like there are, I think, Egyptian breeds of cats that are hairless. They don't have fuzzy tummies. Although Jasper's not that kind of cat. But okay, so we assess the premises individually to ask whether they're acceptable. But we look at the premises together as a group to ask whether they support the conclusion. So notice we don't have two arrows, two separate support arrows here. We just have one support arrow. There's only one support relationship in this argument between all of the premises together and the conclusion. So there's only one arrow, and it groups all of the premises together. So we put a larger grouping box around the multiple premises, and then we have a single arrow that goes from the group to the conclusion. Same process as before, premise conclusion form, conclusion down at the bottom, each claiming its own box. But then when we have multiple premises, we put a box around all of the premises and a single support arrow. Sometimes we put the premise boxes next to each other Sometimes we stack them vertically. Either format is okay. What's important is having the grouping box around them and then the single arrow from that grouping box to the conclusion. Questions about this example for argument maps with multiple premises? Okay. So now, this is probably what we're going to be doing the rest of the morning, is practicing with some more complicated arguments. I have 3 arguments to practice with on this slide, slide 10. And if you go to slide 11, I have a more complicated argument still, where we have multiple premises going on, and we also have multiple conclusions, which is not something we've done yet. I mean, we did talk about it just really, really briefly with premise conclusion form last week. Argument maps are really great for showing multiple conclusions. So in your groups, we'll break up again, work on, I'd say, at least 2 of these 3. If you feel like 2 of the 3 are simple enough and you're good to go, then you can move on to the more complicated one on slide 11. Clear enough? Yes? No? Why is it so early? I want to go back to bed. Why did I take a 9 a.m. class? When I was an undergrad, I really wanted to take music theory, but the only time music theory was offered was at 8 a.m. And so in 4 years, I never took music theory. It was also 5 days a week. 8 a.m. class for 5 days a week for music theory. Yeah. We had a very intense school of music. Yeah. Puget Sound. Puget Sound. It's in Tacoma, Washington. Perfect. Anyways. Music back on. got it correct. For the sake of the recording, I'm going to make a version real quick. See if I can do this in like 2 minutes. Okay, so, whoops. Okay. So the first sentence is just giving us some context that there's this question about whether there was ever water on Mars. So we're going to have one premise that is about what the Curiosity rover found. And then a second premise about when we find pebbles of that shape. Together, these two premises support what in some cases we might call a intermediate conclusion or a sub-conclusion. But that's jargon you don't normally need to worry about. These two premises work together. Where's my shapes? These two premises work together to support the first conclusion or the sub-conclusion. And then that provides support for the second conclusion. Oh, I see, I did thus. I'm going to do it like that. And then we can put a frame around the whole thing. Good. So everybody got this, which is fantastic. Yes. Are there any quick, like 30-second questions about this one? We can pick it up again at the start next time and make sure people remember 48 hours from now how this worked. Are there any questions about this example for now? Excellent. Y'all did great with this one. So please write your 2-sentence paper. Have a great rest of your Tuesday and a great Wednesday, and we will see you on Thursday.